So I would say either pick one area of your life or pick three brands and really do a deep dive.
Welcome to the Moxie podcast. We are in the month of September and it is a new theme for this month. Last month, we talked about nonprofit strategies. Throughout the whole year, we've been talking about leadership and social impact and sustainability. And this month specifically, we're talking about social impact and what are the do's and don'ts of it. And I'm excited to have on the podcast today, Chris. And I just want to welcome you to this community.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, so I would love how we start every interview really, because it is just a beautiful conversation and um just things arise and I just let it flow. But how we start
Sure.
every conversation is just for our audience to get to know who you are. So, Chris, who are you? That's a very large question. I
Yeah.
like to ask like what are you best known for and kind of your journey specifically into this world of social
Yeah.
impact and doing good.
Yeah. Thank you. Wow, what a question.
I know.
So I'd say probably if you would ask those in the fair trade ethical space, where did you first get to know Chris? A lot of them would probably say, if a lot of you might be familiar with a nonprofit fair trade retailer called 10,000 Villages. Um, I worked for them for about a decade, 2006 to 2016. That was my kind of formative years in this space, for sure. Yeah, I got to know so many incredible, talented entrepreneurs, advocates, and consumers, and just people who were interested in expressing their values in the marketplace, both either as an entrepreneur in their vocation or their business, or as a consumer in the choices that they make every day of the things that we buy, both necessity and non. So I think in the fair trade world, that led me into for my decade with 10,000 Villages. That led me to the Fair Trade Federation, where I currently work. Of which 10,000 Villages is one of the founding members. And so, still in the family. I've been in the family for a long time, as they say, but just in a different space. But a lot of those relationships I made over those 10 years are still relevant and vibrant and connected to through my role currently with the Fair Trade Federation. So that's the short version. There's a glancing over a lot of stuff there, of course, but yeah, 10,000 Villages led me to the Fair Trade Federation where I am now.
Okay, that's awesome. I'm gonna like pull us all the way back before even
Yep,
10,000 villages because I'm
sure.
curious if this was always kind of on your heart to be like very, conscious in your like consumerism or to be, care about making sure any, your lifestyle was in that nature of being ethical and fair trade or if, the opportunity kind of started shaping those values and as you learned over the decade and grew. Would love to know kind of how you stepped into that space. And as, yeah, you grew as an individual too.
Yeah. So that's great. So it's kind of like the long arc nature versus nurture story. I appreciate that. I've been asked that before. So I mean, certainly as a young man, I grew up in Vermont. I think my family valued being connected to the land. We had a very large garden in our front yard. My parents were, I mean, my parents are kind of a little typical. Like we went to volunteer at the local food co-op and whatnot. That was part of my upbringing. So I always was connected to like some alternative way of interacting with the natural world, with the consumer world, for sure. I'd say probably more my university years. Was I was studying to be a social studies teacher. And although I grew up in Vermont, I ended up living in the inner city of Cleveland, Ohio. I lived there most of my adult life. Very,
These are
very
great
different.
fun facts. These are all great fun
Yeah.
facts.
Yeah, yeah. So I became very connected to um a couple of kind of theories of change. And of course, everyone that, in your formative years, as you discover the world around you and interact beyond your upbringing, your power, your privilege, your kind of little bubble that you are raised in, it certainly can trigger like questions and about the way the world works. And that certainly happened for me. Um, it's an interesting question. You got me thinking. Like, I um I ended up working before my university years. I actually worked on a cruise ship. You can believe that, for Carnival Cruise Lines. This is very,
Look at
very a
this.
long
See?
time ago,
Look at
and
all these
so
these good
yeah.
facts into your story.
It's just making me. It's the question is making me think about, like,
Yeah.
well, what did trigger that for me? So I really appreciate the question. So I don't want to. I don't want to say, well, I traveled, around and I saw, um, very stark poverty, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
that I was not raised with, and it triggered something in me to just like being more mindful about the power and privilege I have as a white male English speaking US passport holding,
Mm-hmm.
person. Certainly, and just seeing the like the actual effects of colonialism, which I had
Mm-hmm.
studied obviously in school, but if you unless you experience it, not to romanticize it or anything, but or to make it an other, but like that experience I think is kind of common throughout
Mm-hmm.
the fair trade world and the fair trade movement. If you look at the origins, there is within the different intersections of a faith journey versus just an international traveling journey, there is a commonality there that what I call those, whether it's reluctant entrepreneurs, right? That's a term that I kind of use to describe a lot of those people in this space, that didn't necessarily say, "Oh, I want to be working in international trade," or "I want to be operating a retail business." They ended up being in that space because of their experience traveling throughout the world, and I think that through travel for sure, that is a kind of a formative experience that is common. So for me, it was that that time working on a cruise ship, the 6 islands every 7 days, and some of them, were very kind of these resort towns, but Caracas, Venezuela, Grenada were also on that kind of itinerary, and I was exposed to a little bit of it for sure. But then that married with my experience living in Cleveland, especially in my university years of doing student teaching in the inner city at Luis Munoz Marin Middle School. I miss those kids a lot, but that was also a really interesting experience to expose me to, I'd say, I hate to keep using the term poverty, but more of it was really more about my kind of power and privilege being kind of shown to me. I think that's the way I tried to kind of process it, to that really shaped the way I view the world, and I think what is the right way um to be a human, and to be someone who is kind and empathetic, and how can I express my values as a person that is connected to all of these people and value them as an equal, despite all of the realities of colonialism and my own, like I said, power and privilege. Um, I certainly, one documentary that I saw as a young man called Manufacturing Consent. It was about centered around, I mean, certainly Noam Chomsky was pretty impactful on me. I got to meet him in 1999 at the signing of the or 50th anniversary of the signing of the UN Declaration of Human Rights.
Mm.
So I was total like Noam Chomsky nerd. I brought all my books and I got to him to sign them all, and I met him, and um, so that also in my studies, like looking at the kind of geopolitical realities, also kind of I think strengthened my value system and formed the choices that I make in vocation.
Yeah.
So yeah. Um, well, that was an interesting question. I haven't really thought about all those
That
intersectionalities before.
was a beautiful answer because um, I think you're so right. When we look at fair trade, when we look at people in the ethical space, there's always kind of that aha or that moment. And obviously there's compounded experiences on top of it that shape us to who we are because I asked that question because that's not something that was ever me. Like, I grew up in a make freezer dinners, like good old Texas, never leave Texas type of upbringing. I'm the wild one that went away and now, and then became what they coined the kind of crunchy granola in college and like found out who I was and what I cared about. So it wasn't necessarily like from the beginning. And then I feel like, of course, our experiences, the cultures, the people around just shape us and in really beautiful ways if we're willing to be curious and open and learn. And so yeah,
Yeah.
I that was a great answer to then get you to 10,000 villages, to then get you to Fair Trade Federation to be here today. But I with all of that, I mean, we could go into so many different things to talk about. We have a lot of synergies. I do want to focus on kind of the education part for our listeners of impact and social impact businesses specifically that I know you've gotten to interact with for many years and seeing the pros and the cons and then also being able to see what we just see in fast fashion all around us,
Yeah.
but really wanted to talk about the terms greenwashing and fairwashing. When I was getting my doctorate, I took a sustainability marketing class out of Harvard, and it was just like the case studies that just
Wow.
were about he was an amazing professor. It was so amazing. I don't remember his name. I'm so
Love to take
sorry.
a class like that. Wow, that sounds
Yeah,
fascinating.
it was so fascinating because I was like super pregnant and it was like 2 a.m. in the morning because I was in Kenya taking this class. But other than that, it was awesome. And I was surrounded by amazing people and just the things that I just couldn't believe that people are still getting away with, right? That's right in front of our
Yeah.
face. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit and in whatever direction you want to take it, but specifically around this idea of greenwashing and fairwashing and how you see it, and then potentially how we can be better at identifying it and combat it, especially as
Yeah.
consumers, because we have such a power, with our dollar, whether and we can be naive and decide to shut it off, or we can take baby steps to be part of that change. And so it starts now with again conversation to educate people what to look for.
Yeah. Wow, that's quite a question. I mean,
I'm
I could
really
write
getting you
a
today. I
dissertation. No,
know.
I love this. These are fascinating. I really appreciate that. It's making me think. So wow, yeah, I can take this a lot of different directions. I would say, you know, fair washing and greenwashing are a really big challenge for sure. Just think about this. For those that just imagine yourself walking down the aisle of Whole Body, right? It's a department in a Whole Food store, right? My wife works there, and she and I talk about this all the time. Like, um, look at like 10 products and think about all of the messages that are being given to you on those products. It's really confusing. Like the whole consumer marketplace isn't doing consumers any favors, right?
Mm,
I mean, we try our best. The problem is that there's a lot of great companies out there, incredible entrepreneurs, and there's a lot of different kind of theories of change, right? And I think that there needs to be more and more authentic ways in which to express your values like that match your own values as a consumer. Now that's pretty vague, broad statement, right? Um, I think that the problem facing consumers is that it is very easy for me to start a company and to make any old claim I want, right? It's really quite easy. It's like couch it in marketing, right?
Mm,
And I think that is really quite problematic. So, what the Fair Trade Federation does is it says it's not enough just to say we are ethical or we are doing good or we are X, Y, and Z, buy our products because of those reasons that we're claiming. It is it is really, really crucial that you connect yourself. Not, I mean, there's lots of different ways for and a business to express their values, right? As a business to consumers. Like 5, 10, 15 years ago is there were very few options, right?
mhm,
You could either be fair trade or not, right?
mhm,
You could be organic or not, right? Um, Now there's tons and tons and tons. And so I'd say, boy, this is a really challenging topic to take at such a broad
I
level,
know, I know.
but I'd say that as a consumer, the best thing that you can do is to get to know the brand itself and
Mm,
what makes them tick. Look for look for connections to like beyond that company, right? What other organizations are they connected to? Communities or certifications or whatever. And then look at those. Um, I could just go on and on about how specifically like taking the fair trade movement in particular, there is a
mhm,
broad spectrum of ways in which let's say hypothetically, as a business, as a company, could participate in that. And they're not all equal. Now, the world needs more of all of it, right? So don't get me wrong. I don't want to poo-poo on any one single approach, right? But they are not the same. So let me give this one example, and then you can maybe ask a follow-up question or help clarify. So there is a one document that is co-signed by many, many global fair trade movements around the world. It's the Fair Trade Charter. Now, that document basically attempts to enshrine a kind of a approach to trade that puts like justice and sustainability and equity at the heart of trade structures, right? That's really, really great. So it's a way for us to all, as a global movement, to try to be on the same page, literally. But within that, because you're talking about all these different global realities, all these different product categories, it's not just coffee and chocolate. It's handmade, it's like coconut, it's all fruit and whatever. So within the charter, it allows there to be two different approaches. One is through a certification, product certification scheme. Now, the company can participate in this through one product certification. That doesn't necessarily mean the company has to behave one way or another, but it's a way for a company to say, okay, we have X, Y, and Z products that are certified fair trade, right? So that's one approach. Again, the world needs more of it. The other approach in the Fair Trade Charter is through a mission-based organization where there's lots of very complex supply chains. So that means that it's much more easier for the entire organization to have fair trade at the heart of every business decision. So the examples are WFTO, World Fair Trade Organization, and the Fair Trade Federation. We're in that camp, right? Think about this. Um, Think about going into a fair trade store or any store that sells fair trade items and look at all the different products they have and all the complex different handmade elements to them. Like you think about textiles and scarves or home decor and lamps and bookshelves, and then you think about jewelry and all the different little components and natural materials. Like to certify every single little supply chain would be kind of a logistical nightmare, not really practical. So that's why we really look at the entire company, making sure that every decision that is made is in partnership with the makers that are making those items. Now, and then on the other side, product certification, it's like you think about certified products like coffee and chocolate, like a lot of the materials that are grown and then they're
Hmm.
processed in a central location, right? So it's a little bit easier logistically to go and actually send somebody to third party certify and audit that supply chain.
Right.
So again, very, very different approaches, and consumers really, how would a consumer know, unless they did a
Right.
deep dive? The
Right.
problem is that when you have a really large multinational corporation that wants to get involved, you think about what is motivating that company, right? Usually it's market share, and that then there's a pretty big drop off after that. So going back to your question, in the fair washing and greenwashing landscape, to me, the most problematic players in that are these large multinational corporations that see the fair trade and ethical, market share as something to be tapped into. And
Hmm.
that is where I think the biggest peril is that these movements, whether a certification schema or like a movement like even like B Corp is has a challenge of, do you want to change your standard to be amenable to these large corporations, which there could be some good in that. And but to what end, right?
Right.
That's where I think there is a little bit of a challenge there. So again, I could go on, but I think I'll stop there
Oh,
because I know that
and
you have
I
a
could
lot of
ask
opinions on this as well.
I could ask so many
Yeah,
follow-up questions. I mean, first, I will say that like I think it's what is a common definition of fair trade or ethical? I think it looks different across the board. You could even look at like you could compare the two to like the Paris Agreement and human rights. Like you can have an agreement, but like depending on the country and the scope, like how do you define that? And I
yeah,
think that's also can be complicated. And that's why I also applaud Fair Trade Federation and what you guys have done because it's a very complex process to understand everyone's different approach. We have, as you know, have a very unique approach. But like what does it look
sure.
like to make sure that we are honoring, yeah, are honoring the makers, making sure they're getting fair, fair wage, fair trade, right, of what's going on. And at the end of the day, that supply chain is not corrupt in any way. On the other side, I truly, when we're talking about greenwashing, I mean, we're so aligned in that it's like these large multinational companies coming in to greenwash you with that marketing to add something green to maybe add a keyword that's gonna like
Yeah,
ping look nice and at the end
yeah,
of the day you don't necessarily know if that's true. What we can't do as consumers is get overwhelmed by it. So I don't want this to like be a podcast that's like,
yeah,
oh my gosh, there's so many things. I'm not even going to start. I like how you started with kind of like value alignment and finding something that is like important to you, right? Like start somewhere. And then if you want to
yeah.
dig deeper and ask questions, that's good. This is going a little off because this is what made me think of it, or I thought of this when you were talking about multinational. Is like, do you believe, because okay, B Corp is something like all we could, oh my gosh, go on so many different rabbit trails, but do you believe that an actual sustainable model that is fair trade and ethical can be at scale?
Ooh, yeah. I mean,
Because this is
that's
something
a
that I always
yeah,
like, that I'm always like toil with because when I'm with a lot
yeah,
of amazing I rub shoulders with a lot of amazing entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, but do not have ethical practices. And if they're listening, I'm so sorry. You know it's true. You know that
yeah,
you know who you're buying your stuff from. And I mean they have 10 million, $100 million companies. And I'm like, well, I think I'm okay with being like a little small shop, like couple million if we get there, maybe we could get to 10, 20. But like what does that look like into what is and to make sure that at scale all of our practices are still being,
yeah,
I, and I, anyways, just curious because as we're growing, I'm like, I think when I look at these other companies that can scale really quickly, right? That's a different process than with us. I believe if there is a company, fair trade, ethical at scale, it's scale over a long duration of time because you got to do it in a way that makes sense and that's healthy
yeah,
for not just the organization company, but for the sake of your people. But yeah, just curious because I think that's where
yeah.
we're at too. It was just like, can this scale or will it always
It's
just be a healthy, sustainable spot? And we're happy with that too,
yeah. So this is a fantastic question. It is a very challenging one.
Yeah.
Um, so there's two different things here. Like I'd say scale to what end, right?
Mm,
Like what do you mean by scale? Because I think um, in in like the United States, probably more than most other countries in the world, I have to say, this is more my personal opinion, but our kind of perverted form of extractive capitalism
mm-hmm.
has trained consumers to expect a certain price point, a certain level of homogeneity within
Mm-hmm.
fashion in particular, and also like produce and materials like consumables. And so I think when you say like to scale, I I think that is probably more of a an important question to answer. Like what do you mean by scale? Like what are the costs, like holistic costs that go into this connotation of what scale is or should not be?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not trying to dodge your question, but I think your question is something that I've heard over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And it is like this, if it's like this black and white thing, like, well, you know, I think, your approach to fair trade is great, but you'll just end up being small scale and niche. And that's not us because I'm just talking hypothetically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We want to go to mass market. So herein lies the kind of somewhat of a schism within the fair trade movement. And these are just two different kind of theories of change. And I'll get back to your question specifically. One is go big or go home, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is this, you cannot make an impact on world trade unless you play with the big multinational corporations. Get them on board or you're doomed to niche obscurity, right? So a good example of this, and to their credit, Fair Trade USA, right, has done an incredible job at like including these large companies, right, to get them to play Patagonia and Chobani and on.
Yeah.
I mean, now and again, the world needs more of that, right? But it is a very different approach to like what the Fair Trade Federation does, and even to some extent Fair Trade America through Fair Trade International, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is like the green and black yin yang, right? Or blue and green yin yang, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that organization requires there to be some co-ops involved, and the producers must be on the board. So it's just a different approach, right? A different
Mm-hmm.
change theory of change. And it goes back to this fundamental point about scale, right? So scale also expects a certain level of margin. And this goes back to my
Yeah.
point about what do you mean by scale? Do you have investors that are expecting a traditional investor relationship as capital is put in to an organization and then a return is expected? That's like a very traditional,
Mm-hmm.
capital run, to scale, right? Because to scale, you have to have capital, unless you're just sitting on a ton of cash and you can afford to put your own money into it, which is pretty rare.
Yeah.
You would be your own investor, right? And there'd be some legal separation. So it's in essence the same thing. So I think the expectation of scale and the expectation of like profit and return is the kind of thing to consider when you look at this value system, right?
Mm.
Like, I think that so many really well-meaning like business people and entrepreneurs get stuck in this if or black and white kind of question.
For sure.
um, and I think it's understandable because we live in this construct of especially in the business world, that it is the like you said, well, is it Texas forever or am I going to go and be somebody different? I
Yeah.
mean, your example is really a good one to look at a company like, for example, Dr. Bronner's.
Mm.
Now,
Yeah.
that is a company that is showing everyone that they can do it at every turn. Is it
Yeah.
easy? Absolutely not. Are they weird and funky? Absolutely. And it's part of the flag that they wave every day.
Yeah.
So if you ask me about scale, I would point to a company like them. right?
Yeah.
Now, they're not doing it alone because they have connected to themselves to so many other communities, so many other value systems that help them figure out how to do this, crazy thing
Hmm.
that they do. I mean, they're so unique, but they're also quite a leader, and they've
Yeah.
inspired a lot of other entrepreneurs and other businesses to do things differently. And
Yeah.
again, back to your point about scale, it's what are your value systems and what is the point of your entire business?
Yeah.
Is it trying to maximize your, maximize your margin so that you can grow and grow and grow? Or is it like it also depends on what are the limits of your
Yeah.
supply too. So again, I have to like generalize a little bit because your question is such a great one and such a big one. I would just say that it really depends fundamentally on what
Hmm.
system you are choosing to participate in. If you are choosing to participate in an extractive, let me create my little Amazon store and then try to maximize it through their algorithms as much as you can, well, then scaling through any kind of handmade, informal, homemaker like supply chain is really going to be quite challenging.
For
Um,
sure.
there are some pretty innovative things that are happening, doing things very, very differently, even beyond the fair trade world, including like Nest is an interesting example too, where they're trying to work with really, really large companies in these informal supply chains and home worker supply chains. Um, I think they're trying to figure that out as well. How do they navigate in the future? And so I'm really interested in seeing them succeed just as much as I am, the Fair Trade Federation and the World Fair Trade Organization succeed. So, because the world needs all of the above.
Hmm. That was a great answer. I think when I coach and consult, it always goes back to that is like, well, what's your end game? What's your values? What's your framework? Like, and any, design thinking process, it's like, well, yeah, what framework are you basing it off of to answer or define that question? I got to meet, CEO, the son, the Bronner, Dr. Bronner, at a mission oriented CEO conference, and he had just gotten off like from back from Mexico. So yes, they are like a very unique, amazing company. But there was amazing other like Q chocolates and other great
Mhm.
companies there that are doing really awesome stuff. So I think, yeah, to circle back to any social impact, social entrepreneurs like listening to this, yeah, it's what is the framework? What's the values for sure?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and
man,
if I could just, oh, I'm sorry,
yeah,
if I could
no,
just add
go
one other
ahead.
thing too, I think I'm always going to be dissatisfied with my own answer to a question like that, because it really is, I'd say you can look at it at the lens of look at who has the power in
Mm,
those in not only in the question, because there is power and privilege in asking that question, right? Like how can I scale up? And
hmm.
I get that and I understand it. I'm part of it too. But when you look at a company who are making the decision, who are making those decisions about growth, about scaling, and who benefits, right?
Mm,
If you are able to ask that, the answers you get will lead you to the next step, because will be other questions, right? But I think those answers will kind of answer your question much more accurately because it's different for each company.
yeah. So Chris and I could probably do a lot of segments for a long time, because we touched on like
Yeah,
greenwashing all the way to scalability
I'm not being
and like,
helpful. Sorry.
yeah. No, no, no. I think this is, I mean, it's a beautiful way of just like introducing to anybody to just like to just start, but to start with on both of those questions, to be honest, like the theme across it is like, what do you value? And to
Yeah.
put yourself in those spaces. What do you value? Like whether you're the entrepreneurs wanting to grow, and also be a part of change within a community you're in, or if you're the consumer and just wanting to do better with the choices you're making, it's like we'll start with, yeah, what are your values? So I think it was a amazing conversation, and there were so many other questions that could have taken us into a lot of different spots, but I think this is so good. And if you guys need and want any more information of Fair Trade Federation, that will be linked in the show notes as well. But Chris, is there any other also information or how people can reach you that you want to share with our audience before we kind of wrap up our time?
Yeah, yeah. So I know you have one last question too, which I'm thinking of already. But yes, a plug for Fair Trade Federation. So just a real quick overview. Like you can go to our website. You'll said the link is there. Everything about our fair trade community is up on our website. Like we're a trade association of fair trade enterprises in the United States and Canada, about 205 ish. It kind of goes up and down. We get new members. But everything are principles. And then within those principles are code of practice. If you are an entrepreneur that is interested in joining our community, everything that you need is up there, and please reach out to us. We would love to have a conversation with you. We also have things for consumers to find a fair trade store, hopefully in your town, or to shop online. So I'll do a little plug there. Sorry about that. And then also know that for those not in the United States or Canada, we're actually a network member of the World Fair Trade Organization. I also serve on their board of directors as well. And they represent kind of the global movement of fair trade enterprises. And if you really want to, if you're really interested in this topic, we have a lot of information on our website, but also the World Fair Trade Organization's website has a ton of stuff, and they're running a big campaign, doing a business revolution campaign this year. Yeah, I can mention that the biennial World Fair Trade Organization conference is in September 2024 in Cape Town, South Africa, which I will be there, or I already was there. So yeah, if you want to do a deep dive, I'd say start at those two organizations.
Chris is saying all that because I record really early. So I've been proactive this year. So I was like, you can't mention this because this is coming out in September. Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll make sure all that information is there. If you guys just want to learn, like there are tons of free resources out there. So make sure you reach out. We also this year relaunched the School of Ethical Impact with our 5 pieces of sustainability. We have cohorts we're teaching, and we're doing a lot of different stuff for you guys to understand what does it mean to be an ethical impact leader in your spaces. So you can find out more information about that. We're currently in a cohort, but we'll be starting another one soon. And yeah, reach out to me or Chris on LinkedIn. Would love to answer any questions and connect and consult if you need that. And we're just, yeah, so glad that you're here and a part of the conversation because it starts with learning, it starts with engaging. And so our hope is we can inspire you a little bit to ask the right questions and to just get started. And as always, as Chris was, mulling over this question, I love to leave you guys a little bit of inspiration as you go on to your week. So, Chris, what is one last thing to live by that you would love to share with our Moxie community?
Yeah. So I'd say for me, and I think I mentioned this to a friend the other day who was asking me a kind of a similar question. Like there's so many confusing messages. So it's such uh a challenging time to know how can I do the right thing, right? So I would say either pick one area of your life or pick three brands and really do a deep dive. For example, I mean, I mentioned them before. I do all of the, I'll just do a personal share. I do all of, or most of the cleaning in our house, like dishes, the cleaning the house and all that stuff.
Mm.
And several years ago, I looked at all the cleaning supplies we had, and I was like, oh man, some of the stuff is so toxic and nasty. I don't want it to be in our house. So we did a complete deep dive into the best way to clean every single possible thing in our house. And so that I found a lot of, Dr. Bronner's products for sure. It took some time, but now like I just felt like that was one area where I could have some control and be able to, for my wife and I to express our values, right? And now it's just, we don't have to think about it anymore. We know how to do it. So I
Mhm.
would just say pick one area of your life or pick three brands and really do a deep dive in changing the way that you behave, essentially.
So good. See, you did great. I'm gonna give you snaps for that.
I'm glad.
So good. Well, thank you again for being here and with our community of Moxie. And for all of you listening, as I always say, Moxie on.